You don't have to be a hands-on designer to be a good UX leader. And I'll say in a lot of roles, you're not just leading design, you're leading experience strategy. And I think there's a ton of inherent skill sets in researchers that make for great design leaders. And just like thinking big picture, thinking generative, researchers play a huge role in that generative work that shapes the product strategy. And that's what really you need in design leadership. That's a big part of your job.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Awkward Silences. Today we're here with Emily Wurgler. Emily is the Global Director of Experience Design at McDonald's, a company I'm sure we are all very familiar with, so it's very exciting. I am loving it having you here today. We're going to be talking about design leadership from a research perspective. So research and design always working together in interesting ways, and very cool to have this design and research coming together in your role. So we're going to dig into that. Emily, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Awesome. We got Carol here too.
Hey, very excited to hear about your path from research to design, and then also just what it's like to do research at McDonald's. And design at McDonald's, I should say.
Fantastic. Well, let's jump right into that. Carol, you teed that up nicely. So your background is in research, Emily, and now you're the Global Director of Experience Design. So we'd love to hear about that transition and what led you to that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. So my background in research started actually in academic research. I did a PhD in sociology, and as soon as I was done, I was like, I'm not wanting to stay here. So I looked around for a job for a while and actually started in like marketing research. A little tiny startup, we were doing like mobile qualitative. And then I jumped over to like research agency life at D-Scout, where I was part of their studio. And they had like an agency function there. And then I was in-house leading the UX research group at Ahold Delhaize, which is grocery. And while I was there, my boss, Emma, was very supportive of like kind of growing me as a general like UX leader. And so I would, participate in design critiques and kind of began taking on larger and larger scope of just like leading UX work overall and thinking big picture and strategy and even kind of dipping my toes into product stuff as well. And so she actually we talked about, over the past year that I was there, like, oh, is transitioning to kind of general design leadership something you're interested in? And I was always as soon as she asked that, I had not thought about it, but yes, because I wanted, research is great and I always loved it, but I wanted to push it farther and implement some of the recommendations that my team was making. And that was always really exciting to me. And I just very pure ambition wise, the ceiling's higher if you're a design leader. So I, was always thinking about that for, the last year or so. I was at Ahold, and then she actually got a job as the senior director of the head of experience design at McDonald's. It was a new function that they were creating. They had always used agencies. So she was growing a team from scratch, and, she had an opening, and I applied for a director of user experience research at McDonald's, and I interviewed, and she was like, you can probably have this job if you want it, but would you consider making the jump over to design now, just straight into it at McDonald's? And I was like, yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. And I was really quite terrified because, never being a hands-on design researcher, it's like, will they respect me? Can I do this? Do I need to fill some gaps in knowledge? And the answer to all of that was yes, I do have some skill set gaps that I needed to fill and things that I needed to learn. But I've always been someone who, some level of discomfort in a new job and jumping into something where it's like, oh, this role is probably too big for me. I've always just said yes to those opportunities. So I did that again, and made the jump over to McDonald's. And it's been a wild year and a half there because when I started, I was one of 3 people who were kind of in the very earliest team that was going to be focused on product design. They had an existing design system team and a small research team and an accessibility team, but the product design thing was brand new. So I jumped in where it's they were in the middle of kind of digital transformation, quite frankly, and trying to change the way that they build technology products because they came to the realization oh, we are kind of a tech company now and we need to do it in a way that's different than how they were currently doing it. So in the early days, the research background was always quite helpful of just kind of teaching the organization what we do, what skill sets we bring at different points in the process. But a big part of it was growing my team. So I lead design for a lot of our non-customer facing products. So our POS system, like the monitors in the kitchen that tell the crew what to make, as well as some gnarly legacy enterprise tools where it's like you go in and you put in the menu items and you put like the pricing and taxing and all of this data that flows to our downstream channels. So I had to grow a team from scratch. There was no designers on the team. We had some agency resources that were going to be rolling off, but growing a team, establishing a process of working with these product and tech teams that had been there a while. And it was very daunting, but it was also been really exciting. I think it was also nice to make the transition from research to design at a new place because I don't want to call it baggage, but just like everyone there only ever saw me as a design leader. And so I didn't have to explain or justify why I could do this job. So that it's been really great. And I definitely still have like gaps in my knowledge because I was never a hands-on designer, but I do think like I bring a unique perspective on approaching design work. And in the space I'm in where I'm not customer facing, like the research is like so critically important to everything that we do that it's like a really good fit for my background and skill set.
For someone who's interested in moving from research to design or research to design leadership, were there any resources that were particularly useful? Any like mindset shifts you had to make for yourself in order to do that transition?
I mean, honestly, some of like the free like Coursera and Udemy and like those types of classes are good, and just books of just, the basics and the fundamentals. It's really great to have so many free resources out there. I think that those were really helpful. I also like a lot of Medium articles are so good of just like saturating yourself and like following people on LinkedIn who are always pushing out new content to get oriented to that. But honestly, I don't know. I think that like getting into Figma, like learning the tool was helpful too, like the very basics. I'm by no means a Figma expert, but like just trying my hand at some of those tasks that designers are doing every day, I think was also important to do. In terms of mindset shift, I'm trying to think if there were hard mindset shifts. I mean, I not really. I think that I've never once I was in that role, I was not just like laser focused on research. There were some things where like, oh, we have not a lot of foundational work and like understanding of who our users are for some of these products. Cause it's like, some of the products, it's an enterprise tool. So it may be 5,000 users across the entire globe, but it's like a critically important tool. Then our restaurants can't run without it. So just, it was good to have like that research background and just like, okay, here are the basic things we need to understand about our users and use cases before we can do really anything else. So I don't think I had to do much of a mindset shift in the early days. I honestly, it felt pretty natural. And there are still times where, some of my director peers who are much more like visual design focused, they'll like catch little things. I'm like, I literally would have never caught that. And so like, I have to lean on them for some of that, like really like the UI and really specific things I just frankly don't have an eye for. And I think it's okay to lean on peers and even direct reports for that, because in design, there's just like so many skill sets one could have, and there are so few people who do them all well. And so it's just like knowing what I'm good at and leaning on others for the things where I'm not as good.
Yeah. And often those sort of visual UI elements are one level further removed from like, is this a good solution to the user problem or not as well? I'm curious, you mentioned kind of a little bit about the structure of your team. Is research on your team, or that's another team, or how do you work with dedicated researchers? Yeah.
It's a separate team. So we have like 4 product areas at McDonald's, and there's a director of design for each one of those. So I'm over the one called Serve, which is non-customer facing products. But then there's a dedicated research team, and they are currently growing. So it's going from a team of 3 to about 8. So they are like a hybrid model where they all report to a research director, but they're embedded within these product pillars. So I have one dedicated researcher for Serve right now, and soon to be 2, but they So they are like in our design critiques, they're in like our weekly design meeting. So they know what's going on and what the big problems are, and they get to know the products and the users very well. But they don't report to me, which I think is a great model because they need the mentorship of a dedicated researcher, but they also like, I feel strongly to have like embedded researchers in product areas, because especially in my space where the tools are like, this is a super complex workflow and a very specific user across the world, they really have to know the products in order to contribute consistently and quickly. So they, yeah, I love it having them dedicated to my pillar. And the way that we engage them is like, honestly, right now, it's just like, you're in our design critique. We say, hey, we need to test this thing. You're right there. Like, great, let's talk about it. Let's figure it out. Sometimes we'll like, go directly set up a meeting like, hey, we have a bigger initiative. I'm going to need like dedicated time. Like this is going to take a while. But it's nothing, we don't have like a, form we have to fill out and like hope and pray we can get resources aligned to it.
And so these researchers, you mentioned there's going to be soon 8. These serve are sort of embedded in the 4 product pillars. I imagine maybe there's other research, market research functions across McDonald's doing more strategic McDonald's-wide research. Yeah.
Yeah. So we have like a consumer insights team that are doing more of they do a ton of interesting stuff, like a lot of big focus on menu. So like menu development and like what's the cool new thing, naming new products, like a lot of that work happens with the consumer insights team. And then we have a dedicated like foresights team that are looking at like 10-year trends, which is really cool, interesting stuff. But we're a little bit niche, like design research, traditional user experience research that's in our product, like dedicated to our product group.
And then are designers doing any of their own research? It sounds very collaborative, right, in the work with the researchers, but yeah, how does that work?
It's very collaborative, but they are definitely doing their own research, and it's typically like evaluative work. So they, we are able to do some like sometimes unmoderated. It's hard because when our user is like crew or McDonald's employees, it's hard to do like, oh, just throw it on user Zoom and see what we get. Like that's not really possible. But we do have like a remote crew community where we can do a little bit of that stuff. Yeah, so designers are doing a lot. Like they'll get advice on like, hey, are these tasks I set up? Is this the way that I should, set up this task? Is this prototype work? Does this interview protocol, they'll get advice on that. But they will conduct a lot of those like remote usability tests. A lot of our users for our products are across the world. So it's like, oh, I have a call with Germany and then the Netherlands and then France. And so a lot of times it's the designers leading those interviews and doing some of the synthesis. But our generative work, like that's something that dedicated researchers are typically leading. And we always want to be involved in like, if it's in person, we'll be along for the ride and show up and do some observations and stuff like that. But the generative work is primarily led by our researchers.
Because you mentioned it, recruitment is always a hot topic. How do you do recruitment with crew, with internal members?
There wasn't a lot of like design research happening in my area before I started. And so I work for global McDonald's, but then each market that has McDonald's kind of runs their market separately. So we have some global tools, and then markets will have like only the US market has this particular tool. So luckily the US market had set up for kind of their own research, whether it was, I don't even know what kind of work they were doing with their crew, but they had set up like a crew community. And so it's like 100 crew and some managers who signed up to participate in studies. So it's kind of like, user interviews where they're ready to be used for anything they have. So we started utilizing that a lot for the products that they use, which is primarily our point of sale system. And so we do moderated interviews on there. We do some little surveys. We could do like unmoderated, like discussion groups, stuff like that. That is the primary way that we were, at least in the beginning, recruiting for crew users. For our enterprise users, that is honestly just emails. For the most part, they work for McDonald's. And so sometimes takes some digging to figure out who an actual user is of the different products that we are interested in, because we've kind of grown the products under our scope. There are like a ton of enterprise products at McDonald's, and not all of them have like a product person and a design person aligned to them, but we kind of keep bringing new products into our group. But a lot of times it's just like saying, okay, hey, we want to talk to someone who's a user of one of our products, RFM, restaurant file maintenance, very glamorous. And they're like, oh, I don't use it, but I have someone who I think can tell you who are the primary users. So it's like a lot of that. And then once we know, we just have like a running list of who are the users across the world. Luckily, most McDonald's employees who work for the market speak English. So that's made it a lot more like efficient and time cost effective to be able to do those interviews and research with those users. So that's been great. One of the big challenges that we've had with crew in particular is getting crew outside of the US who can participate in research. So we've tried like in Germany, like I just did a market visit to Germany last fall, and I met an ops guy, and we had a new design that we wanted to do some usability testing with. And I just emailed him and I was like, hey, here's my pitch. We want to talk with crew in Germany. Is there any way that you can find like 6 to 8 crew who speak English, and like, I proposed a plan. I'm like, just kind of overschedule by one for over the course of 4 hours, and then set them up in the back office. We'll do it over Teams, and then you'll send them in one at a time to do this testing. And it worked great. And we've done it a few times since then. So there's that type of thing. But of course, we're like limited to only English speakers. And so that's been a challenge. But one of the researchers, Meg, on the serve pillar has, over the course of like 9 months, because everything takes a long time at McDonald's, got the funding and buy-in to create a global crew community. So it's not just the US, but some of our lead markets like Germany, Australia, France, UK. So they're going to, we got the funding to have translation services too. So we can do many, many more quick research projects with crew from across the world.
Fantastic. And how do you maintain your panel?
I don't know. Luckily, I don't have to worry about it.
Got it. Okay.
I think we hire a couple like C Space or something like that who maintains it for us. We just they're like, oh, we need money. There was one point last year, we may not renew this for next year. And we're like, take our money, we'll fund it.
It's working. Yeah. I'm imagining you mentioned some of the methods that you're using, but with just the sort of ethnographic piece of this could be so interesting, right? It's like, all right, we need people in the weeds. We got a busy shift. We've got French fry grease is flying at the POS system. Do you try to replicate any of those real world scenarios or?
Yes. So there's a couple ways we can do it when we need, when the context is so important in the restaurant. So we've done in-person work. So we just, we did a big trip across 4 countries in November, where we are basically creating a brand new product for our shift leaders in the restaurant. So we spent about a week, 4 days in each country, just observing full on entire shifts. So that was great to see it in person. It's it can be hard to get the money to do that, because it's give me several $1,000s, or, give me $20,000 to send a couple of our people for a couple days. That can be challenging, but super important. And recently, the reception that we've gotten when kind of reading out what we found and how it gave us direction and what we're going to do next has been amazing. And everyone's so excited that I think I will kind of pave the way for more in-person research. But we also have a thing called Speedy Labs at McDonald's, where it is literally on the first floor at MHQ, which is what we call the headquarters of McDonald's. They have a full-on kitchen that they can move around to create the layout of any kitchen across the world. So we can use that to test things and create a real world scenario. And we're actually doing it for the first time, where it's we have a full kitchen staff and they're actually making the food, and we can do all the timings of how this changed. And we call it a kitchen video system, or we're redesigning what we call the order cell, basically just that tells the crew what sandwiches are in order, what customizations on all of that. And we're changing the design. And so we're going to do the full on testing where it's they make all the sandwiches. We have the timers of when they started it, when they passed it to the next station. And so that's super exciting to be able to test it and kind of, we're really doing like an A/B test with 2 different versions of the design in like a as real world scenario that you can get without having to do any development or impact the running of a real restaurant at all.
So it's like a form of prototyping, but it's like physical environment prototyping or something like that.
Yeah. And they've used it. They've had this before they moved to downtown Chicago. They had what they call the Innovation Center, like way out in the burbs. And they've had this for years because they do so much testing on the operational processes and like kitchen layouts. And they have markets from around the world come in, but they'll try new things. And it's one of the reasons like McDonald's has so successfully like maintained their competitive edge of just like speed and convenience, because they like very thoroughly test all of these new processes.
2 follow-on questions on this world tour that you went on. One is, how did you, when you were doing sort of the in-person research and then sharing the insights back, were there specific artifacts that you were sharing? I'm imagining pictures, videos were the things that really resonated there.
Yeah, the videos resonated so much. There were lots of pictures, there were videos, and then there were just stories. Like genuinely, the stories helped so much. So the things that we showed, the video that one of the product managers created, and he like voiced over, and it was amazing. We were just showing like what we learned about what makes for excellent shift leadership. And we called it like the difference that makes the difference. And so it's just this montage of just like 3 variations of like styles of these excellent shift leaders and what they do to like run a great shift. And so that like we shared it yesterday actually with like hot shots, like the chief customer officer, chief marketing officer, and all their direct reports. And it just like really brought to life, one, I think framing it in the positive of like, we're trying to create a tool to help like any shift leader be as good as the best. And so one of the angles was, okay, so what do the best do really well? And so framing is like, this is what excellence in our restaurants look like, I think was really resonated and brought it to life for folks who don't get into our kitchens very often. And then the stories of like what we saw, like, oh, you know, at McDonald's, we always talk about like, oh, and then a busload of kids show up and like, what do you do? It's crazy. And that literally happened in Romania while we were there doing observations. A busload of kids showed up and ordered like 70 Happy Meals. And so it's like trying to get those through and describing that and having pictures of it, I think really brought it to life. We showed the difference, like a picture from the same spot in the kitchen during like off peak. So when it's slow and there's like 1 person, and then on peak and there's like 12 people in the same like, you know, part of the kitchen. And so I think that stuff really helped to just like bring the findings to life and help everyone just like feel like they were a part of it.
I've definitely been that kid on the bus. We all have. Sports team unloading, and I just think about what happened behind the scenes. The second question related to this, to the trip that you took, you talked a lot about going to multiple countries, and I'm curious if there are, you know, different patterns you noticed or different insights that you pulled from going to different countries.
Yeah. So one of the reasons that it was really important to go to different countries was not just for the culture, but there's different corporate structures for McDonald's. So sometimes you have like a corporately owned market where there's like a corporate office and it runs it. But then in some countries like Romania, they have like a master franchise agreement. So it's like a person or a company that like runs the whole market and they're not corporately owned. So like the relationship to corporate is different. It's run differently, different challenges. So that's one reason it was really important. I didn't see like that side of things as much in the kitchen as I expected. Like it looked and felt just like a normal, like corporately owned McDonald's. The things that were really interesting that I just didn't expect was in Romania, there was, so the countries we went to the US, Portugal, Spain, and Romania. And in Portugal and Spain, there was like a real openness with the challenges that they have and like kind of what makes their job hard and difficult. And in Romania, we were in each restaurant for 2 days. And on the first day, they were very guarded and did not want to talk about what was difficult. Like, no, everything's great. It's perfect. And in talking with the translators we had who were Romanian, they were saying like, this is a communism thing. Like you, especially with like, you know, Americans here, global McDonald's Americans here, they don't want to be forthcoming about some of the challenges. And that's just like a cultural thing that's left over from communism. And so I was like, I just didn't expect that nuance to happen of like, when we were talking with the folks who were coordinating our visits, we were like, it's really important that we get an unvarnished, like real sense of the restaurants. Please don't, only bring in your best people. Please don't overstaff. Like, please don't roll out the red carpet for us. And, of course they want to put their best foot forward. So they maybe staffed up a little too much, but that was fine. But just like from individual crew, just, wanting to, they just didn't seem quite as willing at first to show us the challenges of their job. And so that was something that I just, we'll consider for next time and how we can kind of break down that barrier a little bit sooner.
You talked about all these insights you've gotten from your international and remote and the various methods you've used. One of the things you mentioned up top was how interested you were in bringing research to action, to design, to actually shipping something of value. And I'm curious if you have any stories or memories, and I know you've only been there for about 1.5 years, but where you've seen that come to life, and is that rewarding?
I definitely think it is. So even just the project I was just talking about, this new product for shift leaders, we've started like concepting our solution and making decisions about, okay, where do we focus first? Where can we bring value today versus something that we push to a little bit later? We've done like, paper prototyping and had shift leaders come in and kind of react to the different ideas that we had. And even that, just like as a researcher, I probably would have been involved in that, but knowing that I'll have the ability to see it through and like, helping make those business and product decisions as well, I think is really exciting. So that's one example. The other one that we're working on, like, as I mentioned, a lot of our products in my space is like old legacy stuff. And so one of the biggest, most complex problems that we have right now is Europe is implementing a law in 2026 to require restaurants to allow customers to bring their own packaging and get their McDonald's in their own packaging. So like you can bring a Tupperware and get your Big Mac in a Tupperware. So that's like one of the first laws to hit. And then later requiring reusable packaging. So like plastic packaging for takeout. Figuring out how to, like, the research that was required to figure out, okay, how will this work? Like operations had their piece of it, like operationally. How do we get a milkshake from the normal thing we make it into whatever cup they bring? That was like, they had to work on their procedures. But then for us, figuring out how do we make sure that like in our back-end systems, we efficiently like allow the markets to tell us which packaging is available, which channels or fulfillment methods we allow different types of packaging. How do we make sure that they can like every different country has different rules about how it will get taxed or have a discount or a deposit associated with it. It's like really complex things that need to happen on the back end. And then for the customer, it's like, okay, how do we, like I was working with the customer facing products as well on this, like what's the most efficient way to allow them to choose different packaging for literally every single item in their order, because that's one of the pieces of it. Like you just have to allow them to pick. And so it's just like reducing that to the most simple like flow has been so difficult. So being able to see that through of just like the research, like understanding how they do things today, understanding the nuances of the law, quite frankly, was hard. And then like how we design it, not just for our product, but all the other products that connect to this product, because this is one that like spans all of our products, all the way to like working with the customer side and like app and kiosk of how that will come to life for the customer has been really exciting, and something that like why I love being like a design leader overall, and not just, piecing out when the research is done.
Such an interesting design challenge too that you just mentioned when you think about it.
So hard.
Right. I mean, just the consistency that is like the hallmark of McDonald's, right? And the variation in international laws, and you take the packaging out of it. That's a fun one.
Is there anything that, it does sound like a very challenging design problem. Is there anything that has helped unblock you, like any practices or methods or ways of thinking about the problem that really helped to unlock something?
Honestly, we like being really, really close with operations, because the operations, like it hits them even harder, because like in the kitchen, how like this is so disruptive to how the kitchens run. And so they've been really leading the charge on like working with legal to push back and like get clarity on some of the laws so that they can make sure they comply, but also don't like overly comply so that we lose money basically. So working with them has been really great, and just like always vetting of like, okay, here's the design choice we are planning to make. Does this fit with what you did? Here's here's what we're thinking of, this particular flow. From your perspective, is this like complying with the law? Is this something we should go back to legal and ask them about? And like being really tight with operations, I think has really helped kind of make sure that we're looking at the whole picture. So that's been a good learning. And then what was your original question? I forget.
Oh, just if there was any ways of thinking about the problem that helped.
Oh, I think that, working with operations is definitely the big one. And then collaboratively, like design, like from the beginning, I was like, all right, this spans 5 products, but we are working together from day one. We're going to like hit milestones together. So it's like, we're starting with flows. Everyone does their flows and we like sign off on them together and then we move to the next stage. And like, that has been very good to just make sure that like everyone is on the same page about like our design strategy for this, where we're headed. I think it set a model for our product team of like how we can work together and should collaborate on something that is so massively like cross product. I think that was a big win for us, and like helped us be successful. Like we're not done. Like we haven't even started building any of this, but like from the design perspective, we have like a really good foundation.
I love these stories. Fascinating, challenging problems, and so interesting, the relationship between, a physical work environment and laws, and then the digital technology that you're working on. I have to ask, like, any other examples or challenges that you've been working on since your time there?
I can tell you about our point of sale system, which is one of the products that I'm on. So we have like a proprietary point of sale. We don't use Toast or Clover. It's like the order taking portions, like they're inputting the order on the drive-through, as well as all the monitors in the kitchen. We call all of that like part of our point of sale. And so it's old and looks like it's old. And it's very difficult to create new features using the existing design patterns. And so we're always in this challenge, like especially with the reusables, because we have to allow for a customer to change their packaging, and that like breaks the way that we had currently like the flow of inputting an order. So just like the balance there of like, okay, we have crew who know this, like these workflows so well that they are so fast. How can we make sure that we are as best we can, like adhering to existing patterns, not introducing new ones, but still kind of adding new innovations and like new business requirements to this system. So that's been very hard. And we're in the early stages of like, okay, can we, like at least from the design experience perspective, can we start from scratch? Do we have the buy-in to start from scratch? So we're in that process of like kind of trying to modernize this experience fully, because we're hitting up against the boundaries of like, we can't continue like to follow these patterns and workflows, because it's just, we're creating a mess. So it's like, that's a tough challenge, but it is like, when you think about, okay, let's overhaul this experience. Great. We'll push it out. It'll be great. We have millions of crew across the world where we have to develop training curriculum and like, retrain them. And like our franchisees have to spend money for that kind of retraining and change management. So it's like interesting business problems as well. It's not just as simple as, oh, redesigning, you'll push it out and users will learn. It's like, no, this is extremely disruptive to our restaurants. Like it must be worth it. And so like making the business case that a design change only that will require so much change management is worth it has been a challenge to like gather the metrics and make the case for them.
It's so interesting. I'm just thinking about, if you were to do a consumer facing app usability, change, and it's, people hate change. And so you expect no one's going to like it, but you do it anyway. And I do wonder, the incentive to not make it painful is so clear in the example, right? You're sharing of, we're going to lose all this time. They have these workflows mastered. The franchisees are going to have to pay for this. Just would be interesting if folks thought of it that way when launching a consumer app. What is the cost of this?
Yeah. And it is like, we're trying to like frame it in terms, remind our stakeholders, like, remember, most of our crew are super young and new. Like the turnover at McDonald's across the world is so high that like they're young and they're new. Can you imagine like you've grown up on an iPhone and then you jump into this thing that was built in 2000? Like it'll save. And so we're in the process of like doing that like baselining and like usability benchmarking to try to illustrate the gains that we can have in terms of like reduced training time and time to productivity if we overhaul.
Got it. So there's an element of it might be a change for the POS, but it actually might be more consistent for someone who's used to using an iPhone, right? To use, yeah, fascinating. Wow, I want to hear these examples all day. It's so fun to get behind the counter at an experience that we've all had. You know, we've all seen the other side of it, but knowing what's going on behind the scenes.
Now I want to get behind the drive-through. Any drive-through stories?
Drive-through.
Yeah.
What was interesting about drive-through that was like interesting to me is they measure time in like literally seconds. So it's like if you add a second, if anything, any change you make to operations or to the digital experience adds a single second to the drive-through, that's like millions, possibly billions of dollars, because it's all about like, especially during peak hours, how many cars can you get through? Because if you can't get them through, they'll go somewhere else. And so it is like really interesting how just like what an art it is to see someone like take orders. Sometimes they're taking orders and doing cash, or they're taking orders while they're making frappes, and it is insane.
No, that's a great point. Yeah, once you've parked your car and entered the restaurant, you're sort of committed. But if you're driving by, you're like, I'm not getting in that line. That's very, very interesting.
I was just gonna say, yeah, I would have thought speed would be important in both cases, but it's interesting to see that drive-through, it's really more emphasized.
Yeah, I was going to ask, so we've talked about your journey from, sort of research to design leadership. You've worked at some scrappier, smaller, kind of digitally focused startups. I guess what have been the big changes in both moving to a larger corporation to with this, very in-person component, this very physical component? What have been the biggest changes?
At McDonald's, like it's a big bureaucratic company in a lot of ways where there's a lot of processes for things. So it's like that, like having the patience to think in terms of years can be tough. Like I'm going to fight the good fight now for a change I won't see for 2 or 3 years. Like that can be challenging, like the overhaul I was describing, and like the persistence to see it through, because it's easy to just kind of get complacent and be like, oh, I'm just going to do what I'm told and not make waves. But like you have to have a lot of stamina to see these larger changes come to fruition. So that's been one change, is just like, oh, have some patience, but also don't like just accept that the way things are can never change. So it's like picking your battles, choosing the hills you want to die on, and continually pushing for change. I've only been here a year and a half, so like maybe my stamina will disappear and my patience for like, continually pushing and pushing and pushing. It's so like the opportunity is so big and the scale is so big that if you can make these big changes, like the impact can be enormous. And that is always really exciting. And I hope I never take that for granted, as I've been at McDonald's for longer. That's a big change. The other thing I'd say, like compared to the company I was last at, like just because the model is so different, where like we have global tools and then individual markets, it's not, you don't just release something and you see it out in the world. And especially in my world, like on the restaurant side, the markets have to take it and then they have to test it and thoroughly, because they have a lot of like custom integrations in their market. And so that process, just like the slowness at which your and my designer's work can be seen in the real world, is tough. And I get it, because like we cannot take a restaurant down. Like a change that we make to the POS, like if it takes a restaurant down, they make no money. So I totally get it. And we're like always looking for ways to speed up that process, but that can be a little challenging of just like not seeing your work in real life for quite a while.
Slower speed and massive scale.
Yep. And then of course, just like, I've had a couple contracts for different work, and getting things through the legal process and the review boards. Like they have like, checkpoints to make sure we're not wasting money, and like that, like finding the tricks and the allies to help you push that through, and just being like a very pleasant squeaky wheel. And now people come to ask me like, how'd you get that through so fast? I'm like, you Teams message them literally every single day. You're very nice, but that's what you have to do.
Well, I guess any like parting thoughts in terms of advice for others looking to make the transition you've made, or words of wisdom you would share along?
I mean, I would say that like, I wish more researchers would consider it. Like you don't have to be a hands-on designer to be a good, like, UX leader. And I'll say like in a lot of roles, you're not just leading design, you're leading like experience strategy. And I think there's a ton of like inherent skill sets in researchers that make for great design leaders. And just like thinking big picture, thinking generative, like researchers play a huge role in that generative work that shapes the product strategy. And that's what really you need in design leadership. That's a big part of your job. So I would say like, if you're interested in it, just start trying things out, like get your feet wet with understanding the basics of design and try your hand at it. And I don't think you ever need to, like, I never do any design work besides feedback and critique and stuff. But I do think like you've got to know your stuff in order to give good feedback. So trying your hand at it and then start talking about it with your boss about what you would need to do to make that transition. I think it would have been literally impossible for me to go apply for a design role as a researcher. Like I just would have been laughed out. So like I was able to make this transition because I had my boss who believed that I could. So I think that's where the opportunity is to make a transition within a company you're already in. So just start having that conversation and learn from your boss or whoever, would help in that, like what you need to do to be able to build up that skill set to make that transition.
All right. Well, I think we should transition to our rapid fire section. Got just a couple of closing questions for you. What is your favorite interview question?
Oh boy. So I have literally I think 30 to 40% of my time in the past year and a half has been devoted to interviewing. So I do have one favorite question, and I got it from a book by Marty Kagan, Empowered, like that Silicon Valley product group guy. So the question that I stole from him was he lists 4 attributes, and I want candidates to rank what, like, this is my number 1 attribute, number 2, number 3, number 4, and why. So the attributes are strategy, how good you are at kind of like seeing the big picture, execution, just getting shit done, process, so laying out those processes that help you scale yourself and others, and creativity. And so I ask candidates that, and just, it's not about the order that they put them in. It's just about like kind of why they put them, how self-aware they are. So I usually ask that at the very end of the interview. So like based on what they say, you can say like, are they self-aware enough to understand their strengths and their weaknesses? And just like how honest they are. Like when I'm hiring for my team, I love it when designers put creativity last, because it's like they recognize the importance of these other things.
Sure.
And like, it's like, oh, of course a designer's creative. They have to be. But like if they say, nothing matters if I can't get shit out the door, then that's like, I understand that they like understand that there is so much more to design than just pushing pixels and Figma. Yep. So I really like to do that. And then it also helps me, like, I know how I rank mine, how others on my team have been ranked. So it helps me balance out different kind of strengths across my team.
And I imagine that question was probably designed for product, right? But you find that it works as well in design. Is that right?
Great. Yeah. I think it works great. Yeah.
What are top 2 or 3 books or resources that you recommend most to others? And we'd also love to hear the ones that you mentioned right at the top about how to transition in design.
Books that I recommend. The Marty Kagan books, they're about product primarily, but I think they're super great to help a designer like understand the product world and what product is trying to achieve. Because you have to, like, a big part of our job is like helping product managers get their job done. So I love like Inspired, Empowered, and what's his latest one? Influence? I don't know, something like that. I think those are great books. Some of the ones that help me transition, I like Lean UX, not that it's like a Bible to me, but just in general, like it's good practices and like helps you remember that we can do things quickly. There's a Google Sprint book. Sprint. I think that's great, of just like, sometimes we can just take too long and explore too much. And it's just like, remember to refocus, like, no, like we can move quickly. And it just sets out like a really good reusable process for kind of getting started on something. And what else? I read some service design books, like This is Service Design Thinking, This is Service Design Doing, just because I like I think it's critical for, it's kind of bridges the gap between research and design in some ways. And it's for the type of job I was stepping into at McDonald's. It was like, I have to know how to do this well. So I found those really helpful and interesting.
And I like the point about just emphasizing the speed, whether Lean UX or some of the Marty Kagan books, because as you were saying, sometimes things move slow in a larger company, but it doesn't mean your insights can't move fast, right? And that the work you're doing along the way isn't moving quickly. So, okay, great. Where can folks follow you? Are you on LinkedIn? Are you on X? Are you on, I don't know, Blue Sky? Where are you?
LinkedIn. I'm like not very social. I post my job openings on LinkedIn and like other stuff that's relevant. But I'm not an X person. I have 3 kids, so it's like I don't spend a lot of time online unless I'm working, to be honest.
Yeah, makes sense. All right. Well, thank you so much for joining us. This was a lot of fun to peek behind the counter, as Carol said, and have a very happy holiday. And thanks again.
Yep. Thank you both so much.